Hello everyone. So Memorial Day weekend I purchased a Harbor Freight dual action log splitter 20 ton. That was a 25% off coupon, so I paid $7.50 for it. And it just came today. There are the tires and some assembly's got to be done to it. So I was taking a quick look at this, of how to match up these parts with the instructions, and if we look somewhere in here, there it is, page 7, it has the assembly instructions. And what you have to do is cross-reference the numbers here where, for example, it says use bolt 15 and lock pin 16, blah blah blah, lock washer 8, lock nut 5, to put this leg on over here. You have to use these numbers, like the 15, 16, washer 8, and you have to go to the back of the owner's manual, page, I can't read that, 28 it says here, and cross-reference that part number to the description. So it said bolt 15, which is a M10 by 75. I've only got one of those in the package. That's the description. And let's see if I could find it on here. Here, M10 75, one piece. So that's how to cross-reference the 2 pages in your manual to what is on the parts that came with it. Because as you can see, there's a number of different bolts, so that's how to know which bolt to use where when assembling your log splitter. Alright, I'm going to start assembling it. I'll show it to you after it's done and some of the modifications I want to make to it. So, quick update. Getting it assembled. All the holes seem to be drilled pretty good so far, straight. The bolts all line up. Everything's mapped out appropriately. All the welds on this frame look good. You know, they're right in the center of the seams. And in other videos I saw online, this piece here, where I think the engine mounts, people had to grind down a little bit because it was too high where the welds were. But this is pretty flat, so maybe Harbor Freight is starting to listen to the customers and making corrections as needed. What I am going to do now is put these wheels on, but I'm going to put, there's not a lot of grease inside, so I'm just going to pack it with grease myself and then put the wheels on. So that's the next step. Alright, a couple of things to note. Wrapped around the axle, you'll see some paper. Underneath that paper is the castle nut, washer, and the cotter pin, which obviously you got to take off. But with the wheel, you got to be careful with this wheel. Air valve goes on the outside of the assembly here, and there are these caps covering the bearings. The inside bearing has a seal so the bearing won't pop out. Take that off. See, the bearing is there and you can't pull it out because it has this seal going around holding it in. So that goes on the inside. On the outside, as I was saying, is the air valve. Now when you take this cap off, this bearing can just fall right out. So be careful you don't drop this and get it all dirty. And what holds that in is that washer I showed you before and the castle nut. And that's basically what holds this bearing in. And then those, I can't zoom in, it doesn't have a zoom, but you can see those dust covers then go on the outside here to keep the dust out of the bearing. And I also put a 5-gallon barrel to hold this up so I can get the wheels on. Okay, so this wheel is on. Packed it with additional grease in the bearings and inside the, all inside the hub. And like I said, be careful that when you take the cap off, the bearing doesn't fall out, the outside bearing. And then after the bearing is in, washer, castle nut, and the cotter pin. Now I'm just going to put the dust cap on here. Then I'll do the other side. Okay, both tires are on. Just one quick observation. Did you ever notice how grease is very much like tar? You go up on a roof to tar one little 1-inch patch or a 2-inch patch. Next thing you know, you have tar on your hands, on your pants, on your shirt, and your hair. The next few days, you're finding it all over tools you haven't even taken up with you. It's the same thing with grease, it seems to me. I seem to get it all over the place, even though I only use a little bit of it. Anyway, the tires are on, and the next piece to go on is the whole wedge there itself. But I'm waiting for some help because it's really heavy, and the two of us should be able to lift it on here and bolt it on. And then comes the engine and hook up the lines and top off the fluids. It did not come with fluids, so I'll have to see what I have around here to use. If not, I'll go out to the store and pick some up. Alright, almost done. We've got the splitter mounted, the ram is mounted. It took two of us, and I'm a big guy, I'll tell you. This end was really heavy. Definitely takes two people, and if you're an older person, you probably need 3 people. This was really heavy on this end to pick up. The other thing to mention is, is this hose here. I connected up. There's a supplied O-ring that you have to put in there, but it was zip tied together with this one, which I do not have hooked up yet, up high, up like right around here. And because this hose, which goes to the hydraulic reservoir, had oil in it, so as soon as it fell down below this level, oil started coming out. Even though there was a plug in there to keep the oil in, some oil came out. Anyway, there was a cap on the reservoir here. I just took the cap off. It was just this clear rubber cap, so no debris would get in there. Took that off, and inside this hose was this cap, which had an O-ring on it. You just unscrew it, and in the kit, in one of these white packs, were 2 O-rings. So I put the new one in here, and I think I have to add one more to here. I got the other O-ring for there. So that's about it for that. And then I mounted the engine on, and let me show you something on the engine here. All the bolts lined up, the holes are properly drilled, the wells all look good, no wells were too high, everything mounted nice and flush, and there's no oil in the hydraulic reservoir, so I have to get my own oil. And I don't think there's any oil in the engine either. And I noticed this has 2 oil dipsticks, so I'll have to read up on that and see why there's 2. So what came from the factory was, you see this plate here is all welded to the frame, but this other plate was already bolted on to this dampener, rubber dampener, bolted onto the engine here. What I noticed was there's a lock washer and a locking nut. What I noticed was the lock washer, you know how lock washers, they're split, and when you compress them they get close together. Ouch, something's biting me. Let's see, this one over here is a better one to look at. You can just see where it's split right there, the lock washer. Anyway, what I noticed was the lock washer, the nut was not down against the lock washer. There was too much gap. So, and that came like that from the manufacturer. So what I did was I just tightened these nuts down until the space was taken up on the lock washer and it was perfectly flat. I didn't want to tighten it too much because then you're just squashing down on this dampener. You know, the 4 dampeners, and there's 4 of those bolts that go up here. So that's what I had to do there. And then these bolts, as per the instructions, you have to put up and bolt it onto the frame and onto this other piece of the frame to the engine. It also uses a lock washer and a lock nut. Normally what I try to do is put the bolts facing down. This way, if the nut comes loose, at least I'll still have the bolt in there. And hopefully I'll hear it vibrating to see that it's, hear that it's loose. But in this case, I'm okay with it. I couldn't get the bolt facing down. You know, the bolt was too long to get in here. In this case, I'm okay with it because, like I said, this has a lock washer and a lock nut, so I don't think it'll ever come loose. That's it so far. I got some other hoses to hook up here. This one, the other hydraulic hose on top. Check the rest of these bolts here, make sure they're all tight, and then top it off with fluid and give it a go. So I did a few modifications to this. First was the table. I made it much bigger on both sides. And you can see where the original goes from here to here, and it comes out to about here. So I made it a lot bigger. It's just 3/4 inch plywood, that's all. And zip tied it down. And that's it. And I could still take out that pin and pull up the whole thing if I wanted to take it off. But I think that should be good enough to hold the splits, to have to, get split a few times. The other thing I did was I noticed the wedge does not go completely to the end. So if you're splitting wood that is very stringy, you got to struggle with trying to tear it apart because the last 2.5 inches does not get split. So I added a couple of blocks of wood. We'll see how, I tried it already, it seems to work pretty good. But what I did was, this back piece, I used a router to route out where the wood stops are. Like on the back of this metal plate, this metal stop, there's these wood, there's these metal tabs, or whatever you want to call it. It stops the wood from slipping out to the side when it's being split. So I had to use a router and route out those sections. This way it sits flat against the metal. And route out the wood here so it sits flat against the metal. But I forgot to do it to the front piece. So the wedge came up against it and split it. So when this breaks off, I'll cut another one out, another 1.5 by 8, whatever this is. I forgot the measurement. And I'll screw it onto the front. But before I screw it onto the front, I will use the router and route out a 1/2 inch so the wedge will recess into it and not split it. But it's much better that way. This way the wood splits all the way through for the those rounds that are very stringy. I don't want to have to struggle pulling them apart the last 2 or 3 inches. The other thing I did was, what the heck was it? The handle. I wanted to be able to split from either side. Use the handle here from either side. So I had some old copper pipe laying around, and I noticed the bottom of the handle here, there was a hole that wasn't being used. So I just put a bolt through the copper, and you know, I had the plumber's torch anyway and some leftover copper pipe. So I just raised it up some and had it go out this way. This way I can reach it from either side, and it's much higher than where it was before. So if we come over here, you know, I can still reach it with the extended table now, and it's much higher and over towards the middle. The other thing, the last thing I did too, before I even started the engine up, I hooked up an hour meter. It was $8, which included the shipping, and it just tracks the amount of time you're using the engine. All you do is you just wrap the wire around the spark plug 5 times, and you just run it away from any hot part of the motor, and I just zip tied it on there for now. That's all. Eventually I'll probably get a magnet that sticks on that I'll glue onto the back and sit it on top of the frame here. But that's how I was able to track that I had the 3 hours of break-in period. And I did all of this while I left it running for 3 hours to break it in. I did split a couple of rounds, as you can see there, just to make sure everything worked. But I only did maybe a quarter of the throttle, because you're not supposed to run at full throttle until after the break-in period. And it worked great. So while I was breaking in, I did all of this stuff to it. And like I said, it's a 3-hour break-in period. You're not supposed to use it for you know, full throttle. And yeah, that's it. The very first time I started up, after 3 pulls, it started right up, no issues. And so far it's worked good. I can't wait to try it on some much larger logs. I tried some cherry that was about, I would say, 1 foot in diameter. Did it at quarter throttle, no problem. Okay folks, that's it. I'll take some other videos of it in operation when I get some larger rounds cut. Thanks, bye.